Hello everyone, I'm Lien from Studio Kato and I am so happy to be back on the Syberia Designs YouTube channel today with this stitched card. I'm going to show you a couple of tips and tricks along the way, not just for stitching, I also have a great trick for embossing as well. So let's get into the stitching, and I am using this beautiful fancy cover die. It's a great background die to have in your stash. And I love that pierced detail because it's so easy to add stitching to your cards that way. Now, a piercing die is a great guide for your stitching, but you probably want to poke through those holes one more time before you actually get to your stitching. This won't just make it easier to stitch, it will also be kinder on your threads. So I just put some pieces of foam behind my panel and I pierce through all the holes, either with the needle I'm going to use to stitch or with this awl. That makes it slightly easier because it actually has a grip on it. Any pokey tool will do. Now the holes in this cover plate are actually pretty close together, so I used a very tiny needle, the smallest one I could find. You do want to keep that in mind because paper is not textile. It is going to tear if the holes are too close together. I am using 2 strands of embroidery floss for this part, but for the second part I will use 1 strand. I vary my strand usage depending on how detailed the piece is. Now, I don't know much about embroidery, I just like the look of it on paper. I really like doing it, it's very relaxing. Usually I just die cut a panel and take my stitching to the couch so I can watch TV while doing it. It's a great night in for me. And for this part, I always like to make it dimensional if I fill up a shape like this. So I go from one end of the oval, so it has 2 little corner shapes, I suppose, and I go from one end to the next, and then I work my way around to fill it up, crossing all the threads over in the middle, so it builds up in the middle and it's a little bit more dimensional there. I really like that look. You can do it for pretty much any shape, just work your way around going from one end of the shape to the other. I can't really explain that better, but if you have this die, you can probably see what I'm talking about. Now I am going to outline this shape because it's pretty much filled in, but usually this method of filling it in leaves some space on the outline or on the outside, and I don't love that effect, so I'm going to fill in the outline now, and I'm only using 1 strand for that. I am going to use, this is the only stitch name I know for embroidery. This is the stem stitch, and it's a really useful tool for outlining because it gives a more continuous line than your normal stitching. So I am going to leave a tutorial for that in the description below. It's not mine, it's just on textile, so it's easier to see as well. But it's a great stitch for outlining. You can watch that after watching this video. Now this is the panel I actually finished. I really love the colors I chose here. At the end you have a mess of threads in the back, so I usually like to adhere these down with some foam tape or double-sided adhesive. It's just going to adhere down quicker and easier than liquid adhesive on all of these threads. For this panel I decided on strips of foam tape that I'm putting in between those little diamond shapes. And I really like this because it props it up. It adheres perfectly on the threads. And I am going to put some glue over that foam tape, some liquid adhesive, because I didn't want to mess up this panel at this point. This is days of work, the stitching on this. It's very detailed. There's lots of threads on there. So I didn't want to mess it up, and I didn't want to adhere it down crooked. If you put some liquid adhesive over top of your foam tape, you can still move it around once you put it on your panel, and foam tape usually won't allow for that, so this is a great trick to use. I also like foam tape for this panel because you can really see the dimension through those diamond shapes. I really like that detail. Now, as I said, this is days of work at this point, nights in front of the TV, so it didn't feel like work. But I don't usually want to add much to my stitching panels. All I add here is a sentiment. I did go for a quite bold sentiment. It is Hello Lovely from the Hello Lovely stamp set. It also has a gorgeous bold floral, but I'm only using the sentiment. And you can see me stamping it here onto green cardstock. I ended up redoing it on white. I didn't like the way it looked on the green after all, but I now have a beautiful sentiment on green cardstock for on a green card. Or any other card that it goes with. I am going to stamp this a couple of times in Versamark ink. I want a really nice impression because that is going to help me with this sentiment a lot. I want to build up the embossing powder, and the more even your first coat is, the easier it is to build up. I am going to sprinkle on my embossing powder. I'm using copper, but you can use any embossing powder for this technique. And then I'm going to heat set that, melt it, and then I'm going to put it right back in my MISTI. I did choose a piece of cardstock that it doesn't really fit in the corner anymore, but yeah, I'm going to just stamp over my embossed sentiment one more time with Versamark ink, and I'm going to repeat the process. Sprinkle on the embossing powder, melt it. That is going to smooth it out. Now again, the smoother your first layer is, so the better you stamped your first layer, the better the effect will, or the better you can build up your layers, because the less bumpy it is in the first place, the better you can stamp on it again. I did that 3 times. This is the final heat setting, and I love that dimensional look. I did the same thing on the white cardstock. It's also 3 layers of embossing powder. I think that's plenty, and you want to do this on a bold sentiment like this, not on a super small scripty one. That's probably just going to make it not legible anymore. I die cut it with the coordinating dies, and I also die cut 3 additional pieces with that coordinating die, so I could stack it up and add some dimension to it, and then I can adhere this down onto my stitch panel. Now it is a little bit difficult to adhere this down because you have all that dimensional stitching behind it, but also because the foam tape on the back of it makes it so you can't really press it down properly. There's give to it on the back, so it's a little bit harder to press it down. So I put my MISTI on top of it and let it dry for a little bit. I usually never bother with that, but this one needed it. I finished it off with a couple of embellishments. Again, a little bit difficult to adhere down on the stitching, but worth it once you manage. Just add more glue than you think you'll need. Be careful with it. You don't want to have it seep out, but don't be afraid to add more glue if it just won't adhere down in the first place. It looks like a very clean and simple card. It's a very clean and simple design, but it takes a little bit of work, and I think it's so worth it. I really, really love a stitch card. The texture on it is phenomenal. It's so fun to just run your fingers over it. And I always save these for my favorite people. I really, really love giving these away because they're just so personal. I usually make these for a specific person in mind, so I can think about them while stitching. It's a fun way to spend my time, I guess. I hope you like this card, and I hope you liked the video. If you did, make sure to leave a thumbs up on this video. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe so I can see you next time.